Hello and welcome to Radiance Revealed, the podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jen Haley. I'm a board-certified dermatologist, fitness enthusiast, nutrition expert, and global explorer that over the years has uncovered that your skin is a true representation of your internal health. Each week, we will chat with leading health, wellness, and even spiritual experts who will reveal secrets to true health and vitality. My goal is to help you change small habits to give you the power to create a more balanced, aligned, and elevated version of yourself. Now let's dive in. Welcome to the show, Dr. Saundra. So right before we started recording, you corrected me in stating that sleep is not the same as rest. So can you explain what your work focuses on and what the difference is between sleep and rest?
Yes, absolutely. So that I think is actually the reason why so many of us are so exhausted because oftentimes we use those two words interchangeably, sleep and rest. And sleep is a type of rest. But as my research and work discusses, there are 7 different aspects of rest or restorative practices that are needed actually to help us feel renewed and restored and regenerated. And sleep is part of the physical rest component, with physical rest having both passive and active areas: passive, sleeping and napping; active being things like taking a leisure walk. Maybe it's using your yoga ball to stretch your spine, or doing yoga on the floor, or getting a massage. All of those are also forms of rest physically. And then we have the other types of rest, which are non physical, including things like mental rest, spiritual rest, emotional, social, sensory, and creative forms of rest. And so as you can see, if we just kind of lump sleep and rest as one thing, what ends up happening is people feel desperate when they get to a place where it's like, I got 8 hours, but I'm still exhausted. Well, you can sleep for 8, 10 hours. It doesn't really matter. You're not going to get emotional rest from sleeping. You're not going to get social rest from sleeping or creative rest. There are certain types of rest that can only be restored when you're doing restorative activities, things that actually pour back into the place of depletion, that fill back up that energy that you've been using.
So why do people need rest as opposed to sleep?
Well, because you need to be restored. That's rest equals restoration. It's the filling back up of the energy that you've used. So every day you're getting up and you're using energy in one of those 7 areas. Either you're giving compassion if you're someone who's in healthcare, or maybe you are using creativity if you're someone who owns a business or an entrepreneur, or maybe you're a writer or a musician and using creativity in those ways. Maybe you're using mental energy and that you're processing and reasoning and using intellectual ideas and things of that nature for mental. So you're using all of this energy. Energy is a depletable source. So your energy is going down as you're using it. What are you doing to pour back into it? How do you fill back up the energy that you've used? That's what rest does. Rest pours back into the places of depletion and helps that energy level get back up to so that you can be sustainable in the work that you do. A lot of people, they start off with great ideas and great expectations and a lot of hope of what they want to accomplish within their careers or their life, but they get to the end of themselves because they spend so much time pouring out of their energy and they don't have a strategy in place to actually pour back into those places of depletion to keep them healthy.
Right? Yeah. I mean, you're touching on so many key aspects because I think a lot of us will say, "Oh, I'm physically tired," and then we'll move into something else, but we're not really resting in all of the aspects. So, before we dive into the different types of rest and how someone may replenish those areas, right? Whether it's creative or social. I mean, I'm very sensitive to social rest. I know that if I'm in a large place like a concert, I need a lot of social rest. But I might not be as sensitive to other types of rest, like creative rest. Like there's that little drive, like, oh, you should keep doing something. But yet, I think, for me, I could speak for me, I'll feel less effective if I don't rest and replenish in that area. And I become kind of actually more efficient if I do rest in that area. So how does someone know? Well, let's cover the different areas of the aspects of our life where we may require or be in tuned better with the type of rest we need. How does someone know that they're depleted in the first place. And then we'll dive into some of the strategies that you have to replete the rest in those areas or replete the energy in those areas.
Yeah. So with each of the 7 types of rest, there are some rest deficits or symptoms, you may say, coming from I'm an internal medicine physician, so my background is such that I tend to think in diagnosis and treatment is how I approach most problems. And so when I think about these rest deficit, there are some symptoms that someone will have with each of the types of rest deficit. We actually have created a resource at restquiz.com. It's a rest deficit assessment to help people determine which of the 7 types of rest they're most efficient in. But I'll share a couple of kind of ways of some symptoms, so to speak, someone may have if they're having a rest deficit in one of the areas. We talked about physical, and a big part of that is if you're noticing signs that your physical body is uncomfortable, whether that be you're noticing swelling in your legs from sitting at your desk too long, or you're noticing backaches from maybe the body ergonomics of your workstation. All of those add into a physical rest deficit. And so we talked about that some with some of the different ways you can overcome that. I'll move on to the ones that are less known or sometimes aren't as thought about as often, starting off with mental rest deficits. If you're someone who notices you have a hard time concentrating or a hard time clearing your mind, you lay down at night and you're thinking all the thoughts and you can't kind of get your headspace to quiet down. Or maybe you've noticed that you have a tendency to not be able to go into deep concentrated thought. Your memories changed, your ability to focus has changed. You're having kind of foggy thinking processes. All of those can be part of a mental rest deficit. And I always say can be a part of because obviously there's medical reasons for some of these things. So I'm referring to the person who your physician says, I can't find anything wrong with you. All of your stuff is normal, so it must be in your head. Well, no, sometimes it's just that we're not taught how to rest well. So in those situations, a mental rest deficit could show up in those different areas. A spiritual rest deficit. Spirituality for a lot of people looks different ways. Some people have faith based systems, others do not. But spiritual rest is a component for everyone because we all have a need to feel like our life has meaning and purpose. And we want to feel like we belong to something bigger than ourselves and that we are part of the greater good. And so a spiritual rest deficit may look like feeling as if you don't have purpose or that your life doesn't have meaning and you don't feel connected to anything bigger than yourself. An emotional rest deficit can occur if you're someone who has a tendency to do people pleasing, or if you're a professional and you find that within your professional career, you carry a lot of emotional labor, meaning that you have to keep your emotions in check to be able to do your job well. People who in customer service, when someone's yelling at you, you don't get to yell back. You get to keep your emotions in check. If you're an empath and you work in healthcare, you can see some very sad things. You're not going to burst into tears in the middle of the emergency room. There are ways that we kind of keep our emotions on guard that leads to a type of emotional stress and energy drain. And so that can lead to an emotional rest deficit. Someone who has a social rest deficit is the person who everybody's calling on and you're always on demand and everybody needs a piece of you. So a lot of parents can feel that. It's like everybody's mom, 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 dad, dad, dad. Everyone's kind of calling on you and pulling on you for different things. And we have to, with our social relationships, evaluate, are there people in our lives who don't particularly need anything from us? Or is everybody we're surrounding ourselves with people who are always putting demands on our energy? Because that's when things get out of balance and you start feeling taken advantage of and start developing some of these social rest deficits. With sensory deficits, evaluate your sensory inputs. If you're someone who spends a lot of times in airports and on planes, chances are you're being sensory overwhelmed on a regular basis. If your office and your desk is situated in such a way you're hearing elevators and conversations in other offices, that can add to a sensory rest deficit. Hybrid workers who are on computers for long periods of time with very little downtime from their gadgets, as well as parents who are working from home, maybe with little kids. Maybe if you're a parent that's homeschooling, and so you're hearing all the kid toys going off 24/7. All of those things can add to a sensory rest deficit. And unfortunately, when we become sensory overwhelmed, most of us respond with a psychological response. We get agitated. We get irritated, agitated. We can some of us withdraw. So there's usually a psychological response from that sensory overwhelm. And then finally, creative rest deficits tend to show up in lack of inspiration, lack of motivation. We no longer feel inspired to do the work that we do, or we don't feel like we actually have good ideas anymore, or can come up with new ideas and new ways of doing things. And so, those are all some of the symptoms of these rest deficits when they can be effective and occurring rather in our lives.
I'm sure that every single person listening is resonating with multiple deficits in different categories. I certainly am. So, can we break it down? Like, what are some quick ways that people can respond to these deficits to start to begin to do the work to replenish their energy in these areas?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, restquiz.com, if you take the assessment, it will give you a score in all 7 areas. And then what I recommend with people is once you have an idea of the area that is the greatest deficit, don't try to eat the whole elephant. I was burned out is how I even started this journey. So I understand when you're like, okay, I'm deficient in all 7. That's overwhelming. Pick 1 or 2 that you're going to initially start with. With physical, for a lot of people, sleeping gets better as you learn to rest better. So as you start resolving some of your rest deficits, you'll find that you can actually get into deeper levels of the non-REM and REM sleep. So I don't focus on the sleeping. That's like trying to like what comes first, the chicken or the egg kind of thing. So I focus on resting better so that you can get higher quality sleep. So the physical form, the active, I should say, form of physical rest for a lot of people just begin with how does your body feel? We get in the habit of telling our bodies to shut up. I got work to do. I don't care if you're hurting neck or swelling legs or whatever it is. You just kind of keep pushing through. So we have to kind of regain respect for when our body is actually trying to communicate with us. When you start feeling the tightness or tension in your neck, evaluate what can I do right now to relieve some of that? Maybe it's as simple as changing the height of the screen of your monitors. Maybe it's just you need to stop for a moment and do some neck shrugs or shoulder shrugs and neck rolls or whatever it is, taking a couple of minutes to do that. Because the thing is, with a lot of these restorative practices, it's not about going on another vacation, taking a sabbatical, or going on some retreat. Those things are fantastic as kind of longer periods of rest. But really, these restorative practices have to be integrated within your day to day life so that you can do them in a way that it helps you stay sustainable within your job, not just between vacations, but all the time. And so just being aware and taking some self checks on how does my body feel and what can I do to improve how it's feeling in this moment. With mental rest, a big one for a lot of people is the busy brain before going to bed. So just a simple one there is what some people call a brain dump. Having a notepad, a piece of paper, something where you can jot down whatever ruminating thoughts you're having. And in jotting them down, it gives the brain this permission to release it. When we ruminate, it's like the brain wants to it's like you're studying for a test. When we were in school studying for chemistry test or, studying for a spelling bee, you ruminate to remember the information. But when you're doing that in the middle of the night over something you're worried about or your to-do list the next day, your brain holds on to it because it thinks there's like a test coming for this. So I'm going to hold on to this information. When you jot it down, it's putting that information on something concrete and the brain recognizes that. And so it allows you to kind of release that information because the brain no longer carries the responsibility of reporting back for whatever that is. So that's one way of doing that. There's mindfulness practices, meditation. In my book, Sacred Rest, Recover Your Life, Renew Your Energy, Restore Your Sanity, I give multiple ways for each of these, but I'll just share a few here. With spiritual rest, for a lot of people, that could be some type of faith-based practice. For others who have no faith-based reference to their spirituality, it could be something like a cause that you enjoy doing. It could be something as simple as being aware of the benefit of what you provide within a company. So for some companies, I do a lot of work with organizations where they're implementing these 7 types of rest within their wellness initiatives. And so a part of that could be simply appreciation and gratitude for your employees. It helps them to feel connected. It helps them to feel like their work has purpose when they are when they're not only kind of reprimanded once a year for, whether or not they met metrics, but they're celebrated for when they're actually doing things right. Emotional rest can be as simple as having a trusted friend or some place where you can be real, raw, and authentic about what you're feeling. You have a way of processing through your feelings. That could be with a counselor as well or a therapist, or it could be on a journal if you don't want to do it with another person, or it could be actually through you expressing your own art. So for some people, actually being able to express their art, whether it's through writing poetry or painting a picture or drawing a picture or whatever it is, that is an emotional release because they're producing something without caring what anyone else thinks. They're producing it for their own release of the emotions that results in the art. And so that can be a freeing experience for some people as well. Social rest can look like having a couple of friends that you enjoy hanging out with or connecting virtually even or on the phone where they have no demands on you, you have no demands on them. You just simply enjoy each other's company and the relationship is life-giving. It pours back into you, it feeds you. And then sensory rest can look like wearing noise cancellation earphones in that airport while you're walking to your plane, or putting them on the second you get in your seat, so you're blocking out some of that sensory overwhelm. It could look like being aware of your surroundings at night before you go to bed and making sure that you're dimming lights and kind of downgrading some of the sensory input in those ways. And finally, creative rest can look like taking time to realize that beauty can spark creativity inside of you. So, whether it's natural beauty like the ocean, the mountains, and the trees, or man made beauty like art and music and theater, realizing that they have a purpose and that when we allow ourselves to appreciate beauty that has already been created, it unlocks creativity inside of us. It awakens that kind of childlike awe and wonder. And I know a lot of people experience that, like when they see like the ocean or mountains or something that's just really beautiful in nature, it unlocks a level of creativity inside of us as well.
I love that, especially the last one on creativity. I was at dinner with someone last night and I was telling them, like, we have all of these things in front of us and we could choose to focus on the squareness of the table or all the dimensions in the room and the details of everything. So to your point, like the creativity, the awe around us actually feeds into us and inspires us to do more creative things. And as you're talking, I'm reflecting on there's an overall message here. So I deal with a lot of like beauty and expectations on attraction and what people define as attractive. And I've always seen people a little bit differently than what magazines will see as two-dimensional beauty. I see more of like the radiance that emits from someone, and I want other people to see that. And when I'm listening to all of the descriptions that you have regarding ways to rest and replenish ourselves, and it really comes down to being attuned with what our body needs and connected. And I ask the why, like, why does somebody want Botox or why does someone want to look better? At the end of the day, it's really so that we can connect with others. So when you're attuned with yourself and you're authentic with yourself, and you listen to what your body needs, you will show up more authentically and you will ultimately connect with people and be your best self, which is, I think, is a driving force behind everything. So this might be like, I don't have time to rest because I have all these things to do. Yet you will do more. You will connect better. You will show up and attract the people that are meant to be in your life if you do rest.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. This rest journey, I've been on it for a while now. initial research was released back in 2017, and I just recently have been kind of doing a deep dive, and specifically in the emotional and spiritual and social aspects of rest. And I have a new book coming out here in next month, actually, called "Being Fully Known: The Joyful Satisfaction of Beholding, Becoming, and Belonging." And it's the next step that I'm finding after someone realizes, okay, I do need to rest. Rest isn't this luxury that I do when the work is done. The work is never done. Rest is a choice that you make when you realize that the importance of having time to be restored and to be poured back into. But then the next step after that is getting to a place of joyful satisfaction with your life. I feel like for a lot of people, we're building lives that we no longer find satisfying. It looks good on the outside, but it doesn't feel good to actually live. And so I as you mentioned to your point, if you look good on the outside, but you don't feel good in your innermost being, is that a life that you enjoy? And it's not. And so I think a big part of it is us getting to this place where we are able to see beauty without always comparing ourselves to it. Find ourselves in the beauty without trying to be the replication of what we've seen, and then allowing ourselves to continue to become a deeper, more truthful, more authentic version of ourselves, and then moving, and that's the becoming section, and then moving over into a place of belonging, not where you try to fit into the mold that's already there, but you find places where you authentically fit, places where you may not look and act and be exactly like everybody else, because that's fitting in. The places you truly fit are the places where there are no replications of you. You are the unique one that gets to stand in that place and have that experience and that journey and that expression. And I feel like we have a lot of people with when I work with like teens and we're doing teen retreats and things of this nature, or even corporate retreats for that matter, a big part of people stepping into lives that they truly enjoy is having the courage to actually be the most authentic version of themselves. And it will never fit in, but it will always fit.
Mhm. That's that's so well said. So what made you get involved in this work? Is it being a physician? Because I feel like as physicians, we have such a privilege to see the very private, vulnerable sides of people that they don't necessarily share with other people. And I used to work at the US Capitol with all the politicians, and I saw sides of people that are not the forefronting, the forefront of society. And we all have vulnerable parts and maybe areas that we're insecure about. Yet we show up in the public eye as perfect. And there's something as showing up as imperfect or whatever, however somebody defines that, whatever that means, that just being yourself that is, I think, so much more attractive. And in a world of social media and in a world where of filters, like people are really living in this should world and not in the it is world. So I guess I'm wondering what made you get into this work in the first place. Was there any pivotal moment or experience that you had?
I think for myself, the initial work started just with my own journey. I burned out. I had a life that most people would look at and say, wow, she's living the dream. Book deals and, news articles written on me and all of this stuff. This is before this book ever came out. And so back in 2017. So before then, and it was around that time that my husband and I have been trying to have kids forever, and it was a very difficult process, and then we had to kind of back to back, it felt like. And I remember coming home from work one day after getting them from daycare, and I was so exhausted. I was like, "I'm in this big, beautiful house. I got the car, the man, the lifestyle, and now I got the kids, and I don't even have the energy to enjoy any of it." I mean, I've been praying for these kids for, like, decades, it felt like, and I don't even have the energy to enjoy any of it. I remember laying on my foyer floor, staring up at the chandelier with tears seeping down my face, and I'm thinking, "I built this. I put the energy in to build this, and I hate it. I hate the way this feels. It does not feel like what I thought success would feel like." And in that moment, I decided if I had the energy to build this, then I also can have the energy to build what I truly want. And it was gonna take some changes, and a big part of that changes was to get to the bottom of why was I fighting the need for rest that I knew I had? And for me, rest felt like giving up. It's like a lot of people right now. They don't rest because they feel like it's giving up, it's weak. And I had to get a new appreciation. I had a great work ethic. I could work myself into the grave, but I had no rest ethic. And I had to first start there to build that back up. And the more I started being honest about where I was at, the more my patients started opening up about where they're at. And I was able to start seeing some similarities. And I started noticing that I was getting an entire new flux of patients that were coming in, and people were sending me patients, and people were driving hours and hours to come because they all had this conversation that was not being had anywhere else.
Mm.
And that's kind of where the journey began. It really began with just seeing the vulnerability of other people who were like, "Yeah, I've built a hot mess too, and let's work this out together." And I had kind of a grassroots research project with these 7 types of rest with this community of people who were just like, "We get it. We're in the same boat. Let's figure this thing out." And since then, it's just continued to blossom as far as the level of research into it, looking into it, and the attention that I've been paying to it over these past couple of years, because I have had the opportunity to have interviews with just some amazing people. One, I won't name her by name, but she's a household name. Literally everybody knows her. And I remember hopping on to have a call with her about for her show, and I just remember this really honest conversation between 2 mamas who had teens that were going off to college for the first time. And just the level of rest that she mentioned in her show after our conversation, and I'm like, it doesn't matter if you're a millionaire, TV movie star, that household name type person, or if you're the mama who feels like nobody knows her. We all have the same struggle where we need rest, and we have a desire to have a life that actually that is joyful and satisfying.
Yeah. I think what I see, and tell me your experience with this because obviously you're the expert. I feel like a lot of people get stuck with like the sunk cost fallacy where they're like, "Well, I put all this work into this. I don't want to pivot. It's too much of a risk." So, what do you suggest at that point? Do people just focus on like what's in front of them right here and the creativity will flow once you're rested, the energy will flow? Like where do people make that initial step if they are where you described you were at, where I have been, where many, many people have, which, can be called a midlife crisis or whatever you want to call it. But how do they make that initial pivot?
Well, I think that's the hardest part, and I think that's kind of the hill people die on right there for a lot of
Yeah.
people, is because it feels like too much. It feels like I put it this way, for myself, and well, I can only kind of this is the easiest example that I can give. For the longest time, the in my mind was, I'm a physician, so that's what I do. I'm a doctor, that's what I do. And so it's like, I can't be a writer, and I can't be this, and I can't be that because 'cause I'm a doctor, that's what I do. And it started really dawning on me that why is there just one thing? Who said that there had to be just one thing? Why is there just, like, one title that we get to hold, or, that gets to kinda confine us from all other things or all other possibilities that we might be interested in? And so I think one of the things that each of us kinda has to decide for ourselves is, do we have the courage to be able to try something and fail and be okay with that? I think that's a part of it. If you feel like you have a level of success in one thing, but that one thing feels limiting, like there's other stuff you want to try. Sometimes I feel like we hesitate to try the other things because it's like, well, I'm good at this, and we're afraid of like messing it up, or not getting it right, or failing at something else. Failing at something does not mean you're a failure. It actually means you're a courageous person who's willing to try stuff and who doesn't take yourself so seriously that you can't go out and fail it. And so I think we have to get to a place where we allow ourselves permission to try something new and fail it if we need to. And realize that even in the failing, so to speak, process, you're gaining information about what you like and don't like. As a coach, when I'm sitting down with someone, I find the hardest question people have to answer is, what brings you joy? They stare at me like deer in headlights. And I'm like, Who doesn't know what brings them joy? Well, pretty much 98% of the world.
Mhm.
What brings them joy? They're just going through the motions. Is that living or is that a slow death? And I truly believe we have a culture of people who are so unhappy and so pent up and stressed up and just miserable because they are so afraid of failure. And what they don't realize is they are living the failure to step out and be authentic, the failure to enjoy life to the fullest, the failure to see that they are not defined by who they are or what they do, that they can actually rewrite the script altogether every day if they chose to.
Right. I feel like this is often very American as well. I was talking to one of my friends from Europe the other day, and in America, when you meet someone, what do you do? And I don't answer this anymore. I say, I do so many things. What do you want to know about? Right? Because what I do is not my job, it's not my identity, right? And in France, where he lived, he said, people say, well, what brings you joy? So, to your point, that's really what we want to focus on because I think a lot of people, women and men in particular, get caught up with the identity, the title that we have in our job. And it's a small part of the pie chart of who we are. And it's sort of like, okay, as a dermatologist, if someone comes in, I'm not 100% sure what they have for their, skin condition. I think, what's the worst thing this can be? Okay, let me make sure that that's not what's going on. So if you're looking to make a pivot or a shift in your life, like what's the worst case scenario? Okay, I end up where I am now. That's often the answer, right?
Yeah, that's such a great point. Because because that's our fear. What's the worst case scenario? Well, uh, you know, it doesn't work. Okay. Well, if you don't do it, it's still not working. So,
Exactly.
and
Right.
you haven't even tried. So yeah, I think it's important for us to it's hard to say don't take life so seriously because it is serious. I mean, I get that. But we have to have some level of that same, like, childlike awe and wonder with life that it doesn't become so regimented that it loses just the fun of living it. And I love that, when people usually if I'm in a networking situation, where everybody's like, "What do you do? What do you do?" My question I always ask is, "What's making you smile in
Mhm.
your life?" And it's so funny because you can get the most, like, pent up person, and you ask them that question, and immediately their eyes light up. Because the memory of what actually makes you smile is the first step towards what's bringing you joy.
That's a great question for everyone to ask themselves who's listening right now, for sure.
Because a lot of times they'll say, "You know what? I just got I just got a new grandbaby." And they're all, like, lit up. I love it because you see that little light, that little spark of joy that just hits them, like, the moment, because the thought hits them immediately.
Yeah.
And I often find that that helps people get to what's actually bringing them joy, and for a lot of people, it's the people in their life, and often the people they're not spending any time with because 'cause they're so busy building other stuff.
Right? Yeah. Back to the reason I think we do most every single thing. If I keep tracking why, it's to connect. It's really to connect at the end of the day. So let's just all connect authentically and with the people where we can show up the way we are, as we are. So I love that. Okay. So I'm really glad we connected because you have so much good insight and I can tell that it's going to constantly evolve into different areas and become expansive. So you mentioned going to restquiz.com. I have your other links in the show notes. And then you have two books now, Sacred Rest and Being
I
Fully
have
Known.
lots of books, but the 2 that are relevant to our conversation are Sacred Rest, which is the book on the 7 types of rest, and then the new release that's coming out March of 2025, which is called Being Fully Known.
Great, great. And that'll be just around the time of this podcast launch. So we will have that in the show notes as well. Anything else you want to add, Dr. Sandra?
Yeah, I would just challenge people to reevaluate how they view rest. I think too often we look at it as this lesser thing compared to the work, and to just to pivot that a little bit and start seeing it as the thing that actually helps them to do their highest and greatest capacity of work. Sometimes a mindset shift is all that's needed to get someone kind of moving in the right direction.
Mm. No, I do have one more question I want to ask you about. You know those trackers that will track like your HRV? Do you think that is a good test of whether you need physical rest or mental rest or any of the other rests?
You know what? There's some really cool ones out there that we've been playing around with and have some relationships with. Some of them will actually give you a recovery score. I won't name names, but some of them will give like recovery scores or your readiness scores, different ways that they term this. One of the things I find that if you have like one of those types of gadgets that's recording, look at the amount of deep sleep you're getting because often that's the level of sleep that actually makes people feel restored. And so if you're getting, at least 45 to an hour and a half of deep sleep, you're going to start feeling more refreshed. The more, the better. And so the better you're able to do these 7 types of rest, you'll see the number of your hours of deep sleep improve. So that's a way of kind of seeing whether or not you're going deeper into these restorative practices.
Okay, that's great. I'm gonna start doing that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's a joy to get a chance to chat with you.
Me too. Thanks. If you're enjoying the Radiance Revealed podcast, please don't forget to subscribe so you'll always know when there's a new episode. And while you're at it, please give us a review, as that helps others to find this podcast. And if you want to connect with me, please visit my website, drjenhaley.com, or you can find me on Instagram at drjenhaley.
Hello, everyone. Just a friendly reminder that this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. The statements and views expressed on this podcast are not medical advice. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility made for statements made by guests. Neither this podcast nor any of the information contained within it are a substitute for care by a qualified medical professional. This podcast is provided with the understanding that it does not constitute medical or professional advice or services. If you are looking for help in your journey, please seek out a qualified medical practitioner.